And good evening, everyone. It's Juju Chang, co-anchor of Nightline, coming at you live again from another corner of ABC News tonight. It's been an exciting and meaningful 2.5 days of programming, and I'm so honored and thrilled to be with you again. I know that you're all busy, so it's even more impressive that you're finding the time to be present for all of these incredibly important sessions that have been so insightful with so many distinguished panelists. And each talk that we've had throughout these days have encapsulated the work that the ADL is doing in communities around the world, whether it's on the ground advocacy or monitoring and combating online hate, the work they do with students. ADL is working all around to build safer communities and more cohesive ones at that. Tonight, ADL has another incredible night of programming featuring ADL CEO Jonathan Greenblatt's annual State of Hate from Washington, D.C. We have an exhilarating conversation between writer, activist, and comedian Baratunde Thurston, as well as actress, producer, CEO, and all-around cool person, Tracee Ellis Ross. We'll also have ADL's presentation of their inaugural Changemaker Award to basketball legend Sue Bird, and a special address from the senior rabbi of Sinai Temple in Los Angeles, Rabbi David Wolpe, who brings an important message tonight on the 83rd anniversary of Kristallnacht. And finally, a preview of ADL's In Concert Against Hate, taking place virtually on December 12th. So there's a lot to look forward to. But before I turn it over to Jonathan, I wanted to spend a few minutes and turn towards a timely topic in the news. It's the trial of the neo-Nazis and white supremacists responsible for the 2017 Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, Virginia. As you know, a vehicle plowed into Heather Heyer, killing her. And I'm actually preparing a report for Nightline on the civil trial and heading to Charlottesville on Friday, which is where we find our next guest, Amy Spitalnick. She's been in Charlottesville, she told me, week 4 and counting, and will be there throughout the duration of the trial. And, in many ways, the groundbreaking trial is taking place right now. So I want to bring in Executive Director of Integrity First for America, Amy Spitalnick, in Charlottesville. Hey, Amy.
Hi, Juju.
As we said off camera, this is a trial that you could talk about for ages. But first, give us the overview of the case and what makes it such a landmark lawsuit.
Absolutely. Well, look, at the end of the day, this is a case that's about accountability and justice. What happened 4 years ago here in Charlottesville was not an accident. It was violence that was motivated by racism, by anti-Semitism, and by other forms of hate. And the violence was planned meticulously in advance, down to discussions of hitting protesters with cars, and then, of course, attempts to chalk it up to self-defense. And so this case is really about accountability for the 24 individuals and hate groups most directly responsible for what happened, justice for our plaintiffs, for this community. I think we all remember viscerally watching those images from 4 years ago, Nazis with tiki torches specifically chosen to evoke the Nazis and the KKK, chanting things like Jews will not replace us on that Friday night. And then, of course, on Saturday, a day of violence that culminated in the car attack. And what happened, as I said, was no accident, but rather it was planned in advance. These extremists then came to Charlottesville to engage in the violence, and then they celebrated the violence afterwards as, quote, a huge moral victory and payback time. And so in this lawsuit, we are using a statute known as the Ku Klux Klan Act of 1871, passed 150 years ago to deal with Klan violence in the South, and sadly having a renaissance in the year 2021 because of resurgent white supremacy. And it's about making clear that there will be consequences for this sort of violent hate.
And I think you basically answered my next question. So I'll sort of rephrase it a little, which is, you mentioned the Ku Klux Klan law statute. It hasn't been used very much. In many ways, this trial is being referred to as path-breaking, groundbreaking in many ways. In what ways do you see it breaking new ground potentially?
Yeah, look, right now, this is the only legal effort taking on the full leadership of this movement, the full leadership responsible for what happened in Charlottesville 4 years ago that unsurprisingly is deeply connected in the center of this broader, violent, alt-right, white supremacist movement. We know historically civil litigation has played a crucial role in accountability and justice when it comes to these sorts of hate groups. And what's unique about our case is that it really takes on that full leadership. And that's important for so many reasons. It's important because accountability has been sorely lacking in recent years. I think people are generally shocked when they realize there has been so little accountability in the aftermath of Unite the Right, a handful of criminal cases, but the leadership responsible has not really faced the consequences. And this case does that. And it's also important because we know that cases like this, the financial, operational consequences, can create a deterrent to others who are looking on and understanding that if they participate in this sort of violence and extremism, they too will face consequences.
You did it again. You answered my third question, which is how do you see, these efforts to bankrupt these groups as almost as you say a deterrent effect? I mean, what kind of dent might it make in the surge of these violent white supremacist groups? And give us a sense of who some of these groups are that are named plaintiffs in this case.
Yeah. Look, the defendants in this lawsuit are, in some cases, household names. People like Richard Spencer, who coined the term alt-right, groups like National Socialist Movement, which is one of the largest neo-Nazi groups in the country, people like Matthew Heimbach and Matt Parrott, Jeff Scoop, groups like League of the South, certain Klan groups, the paramilitary armed tactical wing of the Proud Boys, for example. And some of these defendants have already faced very real consequences. Richard Spencer has called this case, quote, financially crippling. Defendants have talked about how it's undermined their ability to go about their business, forced their organizations to cut operations or to not participate in certain subsequent violent events. A number of defendants have faced large financial sanctions for so flagrantly flouting court orders. We've won evidentiary sanctions, which means that some of the core facts of this lawsuit are now already established against two key defendants. We've won default judgments against 7 defendants. And so even already, this case has had a very significant impact on these defendants financially, operationally, legally. And by hopefully winning large financial judgments against the defendants from a jury when this trial is through, it can effectively bankrupt, disrupt, and dismantle these groups and these leaders. And that's important not just because of the accountability that they should face and the justice our plaintiffs and the Charlottesville community deserve, but because of the message it sends, the precedent it sends that, again, there will be consequences for this sort of violent hate.
And so, what for you has been the takeaway? In other words, you mentioned some of these evidentiary rulings. What have you learned in getting access to that information?
So we are now in week 3 of trial, week 4 of our team being here in Charlottesville. And even after 4 years of our team being steeped in the evidence in this case and this sort of hate and violence, I think listening to the testimony day in and day out is still shocking. It's still horrifying. The defendants have spoken from the witness stand in court admiringly about Hitler. They've dropped the N-word in court. They've made jokes on the stand with each other about Hitler. They literally, one neo-Nazi defendant asked another about his favorite Holocaust joke. We had Deborah Lipstadt, who's President Biden's nominee as special envoy to combat anti-Semitism, and obviously a nationally renowned expert on anti-Semitism. She was an expert witness in our case, and she testified that she was even taken aback by the level of hate that fuels these groups. And I think no less shocking, really, is the mountain of evidence that our team has started to present, illustrating the violence that was always the intent here. The discussions of this violence as a, quote, racial holy war. The fact that the ex-girlfriend of one defendant testified that he would come home from his day job at an extermination company and talk about how he wished he was exterminating Jews. And they went to a party at Richard Spencer's house weeks before Unite the Right, where there was active discussion of hitting protesters with cars. They talked about cracking skulls, about using flagpoles as spears. And so it is even deeper and darker and more horrifying than I think anyone could ever have imagined when they saw the violence unfold 4 years ago. And I think for me, it also is a reminder of how incredibly courageous our plaintiffs are. 9 people who were injured in this violence, who are willingly reliving their trauma, reliving the worst days of their life in order to hold accountable those responsible. And so as horrific as it is, it also gives me some hope and inspiration just watching our incredible plaintiffs willingly relive that trauma to fight for the justice and accountability they deserve.
Right before joining this call, I talked to Heather Heyer's mom, and she was talking about how her daughter died, doing something not that heroic in her mind. Like she kept saying, let's not make my daughter a saint, but I said to her, being an ally and standing up and doing the right thing is heroic, and that is what you're suggesting these plaintiffs are doing by standing up in court and speaking the truth. And yet, one final question to you. Do you draw a connection between the anti-Semitism and the racism and the anti-immigrant ideology that seems to have been motivating?
Yeah, you can't separate these forms of hate. And I'm sure that I know this has been talked about over the course of the conference over the last few days, but all of these ideologies are wrapped up in the white supremacy that is, I think, the most, to quote the Department of Homeland Security, the most persistent and lethal threat to our country right now. Anti-Semitism is at the core of this, with this idea of replacement theory, this idea that Jews are the puppet masters, actively orchestrating a white genocide, the replacement of the white race through support for these other communities, support for Black and Brown communities, immigrants, refugees, anyone who doesn't fit into these extremist, vile, and narrow definition for what this country should be. And 4 years ago in Charlottesville, it was shocking when there were neo-Nazis with torches chanting "Jews will not replace us," speaking specifically to this conspiracy. But I think what should be equally shocking is how normalized this ideology has become over the last few years. We now see it on primetime Fox News with Tucker Carlson espousing it nearly every night, with elected officials giving it a sort of a stamp of approval. And that makes it all the more important that we show there is consequence for this sort of violent hate, that the people who heard this idea, Jews will not replace us, as a call to battle, as Deborah Lipstadt called it when she testified the other day, that there will be consequences if you are motivated by this anti-Semitism, by this racism, by this extremism, and you violently attack people. If you plan violence, engage in that violence, celebrate that violence, it won't go unanswered. And that's what this case is all about.
Well, Amy, thank you so much for your work and for joining us tonight from Charlottesville. And I look forward to seeing you face to face on Friday.
Thank you so much, Juju.
All right. Well, as you heard, throughout Never Is Now 2021, it's been marked with this surge of violence that Amy's referring to and the very divisive rhetoric we've seen. We started this year witnessing an attack on Capitol Hill and on democracy itself. We witnessed sickening attacks against the AAPI community. We watched as Jews were assaulted on the streets of New York and Los Angeles. All this against the backdrop of our country recovering from a debilitating pandemic, pushing for social justice and addressing systemic racism, and grappling with anti-immigrant rhetoric from government officials at the highest levels. So here to discuss the state of hate in 2021 and talk about what we can do as a community to fight back is my friend, ADL's CEO and National Director, Jonathan Greenblatt, who's in DC just this week.
Thank you all for joining the 6th annual Never Is Now conference. As we meet, the world's nations are gathered in Scotland to address one of the most pressing and existential crises facing our planet, climate change. The first warnings that carbon emissions may be accelerating, the warming of the planet, were made way back in 1988. And over the years, scientists, activists, and politicians rang the alarm bells. Some steps were taken, but the rate of emissions kept going up. Once-in-a-century storms happened every few years, and many dismissed them as flukes. Meanwhile, the climate kept changing. And now, in our time, it's all rapidly accelerating. You might ask, so Jonathan, what does this have to do with anti-Semitism? Let me explain. Over the past few years, I've seen things, like all of you, that I never would have imagined. We've been shocked, we've mourned, we've worried about the future. And in thinking about anti-Semitism in America and around the world, I actually find myself coming back to climate change. You see, attacks of the far right are like the hurricane bearing down on you right now, immediate and deadly, and we need to protect ourselves and our community from such lethal threats. But what also worries me more and more is the anti-Semitism taking shape on the left, which is more akin in many ways to climate change. Slowly, subtly, but surely, the temperature is increasing. Often people don't perceive the shift or choose to ignore it, even when there were once uncommon storms. But the environment is becoming more hostile, and the conditions threaten to upend life as we know it if we simply sit back and do nothing. My friends, we must contend both with the storms in front of us and with the changing climate of intensifying anti-Jewish hate. We can't allow politics and polarization to prevent us from seeing one side or the other. We can't just point fingers at those with whom we may disagree or turn a blind eye when prejudice festers, even among our friends. This isn't an either-or issue, but a matter of both and. Because make no mistake, unlike virtually every other issue in American life, anti-Semitism knows no partisan bounds. It needs to be fought aggressively, whether it comes from the right or the left. It must be confronted, even if that means taking on old friends and longstanding allies. Remember this. Neither a Trumpified Republican Party nor a Corbynized Democratic Party is good for our community or, frankly, for America. Last month, I took a trip to Europe, which had me thinking of the first time I went there as ADL CEO back in 2016. At that time, I was struck by the prevalence of police cars outside Schulz in the UK, or metal detectors at a Jewish museum in Brussels. And I was stunned to meet members of the French Foreign Legion who were stationed in front of a Jewish day school in a Paris suburb. And the leaders across Europe who echoed anti-Semitic tropes seemed to me like a strange vestige from the land that invented inquisitions and pioneered pogroms. Unfortunately, now it's all too familiar and frightening, and frankly, hits far closer to home. I mean, after Pittsburgh and Poway, what shul in America wouldn't have an armed guard? After tiki torch-lit marches of neo-Nazis chanting, "Jews will not replace us," what Jewish school or community center wouldn't erect taller fences or install metal detectors? And after Brooklyn and Times Square, what Jewish person wouldn't tense up at the sudden sounds of footsteps behind them, even in broad daylight? After the 30th time a politician compares the state-sponsored genocide of 6 million Jews to mandates to wear masks indoors? Or when a major news network gives an hour to its top demagogue to run a special on the threat of George Soros? Who doesn't start to worry? And so as I stand here in Washington, D.C., where the Capitol was the site of a violent insurrection earlier this year led by right-wing extremist groups, let me be crystal clear. These are lethal threats to our democracy, potentially cataclysmic forces that could destroy life as we know it. And we must protect ourselves. Indeed, ADL has identified more than 50 individuals who were involved with the attack who had direct ties to right-wing extremist groups. And as we saw on January the 6th, or in Pittsburgh 3 years ago, and as the ADL Center on Extremism literally tracks daily, these threats from the right are like Category 5 hurricanes bearing down on us, threatening to bring immediate violence and overwhelming harm. And in the face of this, we do need to both defend ourselves and work to combat it aggressively. And yet, at the same time, we also must contend with intensifying anti-Semitism on the left, which, as I previously said, could be compared to climate change. Slowly and steadily, the temperature is rising. Surely there are occasional storms, but too often people choose to ignore these signs or deny there is a pattern, that anything is changing. But by any measure, the metaphorical temperature is climbing and the conditions are worsening. And it's a situation that threatens to upend life as we know it. What's taking hold is, at its worst, a belief that all Jews somehow are oppressors, part of a white establishment that has exploited racial and ethnic minorities for generations. Now, this would come as a big surprise to my grandparents who fled Europe for their lives, only to come to this country and experience discrimination. Or the Iranian or Ethiopian Jews who came more recently, but also seeking refuge from vicious persecution. Or to say nothing of the growing number of Jews of color found in every one of our communities, including my own family. Now, it's crucial that we realize that despite all the laws on the books and the hard progress that's been made, there is still discrimination against African Americans, Latinos, Asian Americans, Muslims, and other minorities in our country today. But to claim to fight for justice for all, yet ignore the Jewish experience, is not just wrong, it's dangerous, an ugly form of historical revisionism motivated by malice. The same goes for using the lens of American race relations to try and explain the complex and completely unrelated Israeli-Palestinian conflict. It makes no sense. Yet voices on the left, growing louder and louder, are embracing these views. Yes, the climate is changing. Now, don't get me wrong. There certainly are things that the Israeli government has done that deserve rebuke. But criticizing the actions of a government is categorically different than deeming it illegitimate because of wildly inaccurate claims that it's instituting apartheid or leading a genocide. It's fundamentally different from calling for its eradication, either by explicitly or implicitly supporting a so-called one-state solution. Slandering Israel as settler colonial or white supremacist is flat out wrong on the facts, and little more than a deliberate effort to conflate the Jewish state with the misdeeds of others in order to degrade its support and condition the public for its demise. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. Anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. Denying the right of Jews alone among all peoples of the world to have a homeland is anti-Semitism. Singling out just the Jewish state for condemnation while ignoring others is prejudice. And unfortunately, these positions appear to be increasingly popular. It explains why last month Sally Rooney, the Irish novelist, announced to the world that she wouldn't allow an Israeli publisher to publish her latest novel in Hebrew, yet, interestingly, she had nothing to say, no protest to offer about the prospect of her novel being published in China or Russia or Iran, where her previous works also had been printed. Or recall just a few weeks ago when a so-called progressive organization right here in DC called for the removal of Jewish groups, such as the National Council of Jewish Women, from a broad coalition advocating for DC statehood because the Jewish groups were perceived to be, quote, Zionist. ADL pushed back. It became news all over the country. Yet scores of progressive organizations that have partnered with ADL or other Jewish groups for decades said nothing, not even a tweet. Why? Because being anti-Israel is popular. It's trendy. Ask your sons and daughters away at college. They'll tell you of the professors who would rather preach their politics than teach their classes. Or the student governments who propose resolutions supporting the BDS movement. Or the university presidents who are quick to jump on any other sign of bigotry, but could barely bring themselves to condemn the hate directed at Jewish students on their own campuses earlier this year during the conflict in Gaza. And we all remember those tense weeks in May. During this time, we also saw how this changing climate indeed can produce raging storms. Jews walking down the street in New York City attacked in broad daylight. Jewish diners enjoying a sushi dinner in Los Angeles assaulted on the street. ADL tracked a dizzying rise in anti-Semitic violence during the conflict between Israel and Hamas. Incidents began a steep upward climb on May 11th as the military operations were initiated. We logged 251 incidents from that date through the end of the month, and that was an increase of 115% over the same period last year. In the face of these threats, the immediate violence of a bomb cyclone and the intensifying threat of climate change, we, with your support, are acting. Now, we know there's no silver bullet, so instead ADL is taking a whole of society strategy to heal our collective wounds and stop the spread of hate. First, we're working closely with the current administration and allies in Congress from both sides of the aisle to implement our Protect Plan, a comprehensive agenda to take on domestic terrorism, anti-Semitism, and hate. We're advocating for ideas on both ends of Pennsylvania Avenue. And the White House just released the first ever national strategy on countering domestic terrorism, and it's a plan that tracks closely to ADL's recommendations. And on Capitol Hill, we secured the passage of new hate crime legislation to address the rise in anti-AAPI hate, and we continue to push for an increase in funding for the Nonprofit Security Grant Program to protect our community's institutions. Even as we fight for our issues, we continue to also support others in need. I was proud that ADL incubated and then launched the Asian American Foundation earlier this year, sharing what we've learned over the past century with the AAPI community. I'm delighted that Derek Johnson, CEO of the NAACP, has joined me as co-chair of the Sports Leadership Council, so we can explore how to use athletics to overcome intolerance and elevate hope. And ADL has educated thousands from Latino communal groups and relevant consulates to address the rise of hate crimes directed at people living in the U.S. who hail from Central or South America. And beyond these efforts, we've accelerated our work to reform social media companies on whose sites anti-Semitism and hate is spreading. I think it's appalling that it took the bravery of a handful of whistleblowers to remind the world how Facebook's leadership continues to ignore this problem and put profits over people. They misled the public about the spread of information that led to January the 6th. They said they were doing everything they could to stop hate on their services, but ADL disproved their claims with our analyst findings and with independent studies. And now we know from Facebook's own internal research that they knew they were not telling the truth. We recognize the critical role Facebook was playing in fomenting extremism years ago. It's why you heard from Sacha Baron Cohen at the last in-person Never Is Now conference. It's why we organized the Stop Hate for Profit campaign in 2020, a coalition of civil rights groups that motivated Coke, McDonald's, Starbucks, and more than 1,000 of the most prominent brands in the world to pull their ads from Facebook. Our coalition managed to wring a series of concessions out of the company for the first time in Facebook's history, from hiring an executive to oversee civil rights, to classifying Holocaust denialism as hate speech, to ejecting extremists off the platform once and for all. Now, third, we're emphasizing partnerships at ADL like never before, working hand in hand with the rest of the Jewish community to serve our shared interests. For example, ADL partnered with Hillel to help prepare students for the rising tide of anti-Semitism on campus, and that partnership is poised to grow. We've collaborated with the reform and conservative movements to serve as a resource for them to assist their institutions from synagogues to summer camps, day schools to youth groups. We're also now working with the Community Security Service that supports more than 100 Orthodox shuls across America. And our major investment in Integrity First for America, the nonprofit bringing landmark lawsuits against neo-Nazis and white supremacists who were responsible for the violence in Charlottesville in 2017, has borne real fruit as the trial is going on right now. These are all meaningful steps forward for the Jewish community, but really, they're the consequential actions for the entire country. Because as you know, hate often starts with the Jews, but it doesn't end there. It inevitably leads to more xenophobia, more racism, more homophobia, more hate. That's why, despite all the challenges from the right and the left that we've discussed at Never Is Now, don't forget that we have allies. We have friends. We have neighbors who know they cannot turn a blind eye. That's why our fight is their fight, and their fight is our fight. We see it in the work of Muhammad al-Samawi, who received the Daniel Pearl Award earlier today. Muhammad is the founder of the Abrahamic House, an inspiring interfaith community space that builds bridges between individuals of different religious traditions, one by one. We see it in the non-Jewish members of parliament in the UK who stood up to the seething anti-Semitism of Jeremy Corbyn and today are working hard to save the Labour Party. And we see it in the broad coalition of allies who came together for our Stop Hate for Profit campaign in 2020. Working in concert with others is the only way that anti-Semitism and hate can be beaten back. We must work together, see our common humanity, and resolve that never is now. Thank you for joining us, and I hope to see you in person next year.
Thank you, Jonathan, for that comprehensive global overview of anti-Semitism and where we stand on extremism. And thank you also for being such an inspiring thought leader and a doer in the equity space. On the topic of hope and bringing people together, though, we have a very special conversation up next for you. Acclaimed actor, producer, and CEO Tracee Ellis Ross sits down with writer, activist, and comedian Baratunde Thurston to share eye-opening insights into identity and how to lift up others in the country through connections, both personal and inter-community-wise. In this time of surging anti-Semitism and uneven progress on addressing widespread racial and gender injustices, please welcome Tracee Ellis Ross and Baratunde Thurston.
I want to start with just a deep breath in and out. Me and you, Tracee, also anybody watching this, because wherever moment it is, we're probably going through a lot. Yo, my name is Baratunde Thurston. I'm a writer, an activist, sometimes a comedian. I host a podcast called How to Citizen. I wrote a book called How to Be Black. I produce television shows and talk live into mics and screens, trying to tell a better story of us, not just of me, and using some skills of humor and analysis and obsession to explain where we've been and where we can go that's in a better place. And that better place is right here with Tracee Ellis Ross. For me, right here, right now, this is a very special moment with this singer, this actress, this entrepreneur behind Pattern Beauty, this Golden Globe winner, this producer, director, lemon and salt loving stiletto wearer. Welcome to this shared screen, Tracee. Hello.
Hello. Thank you for introducing me in my square so beautifully. And also it's lovely to properly see you. I took some deep breaths before we got on here, but this deep breath to take together is always a good way to start a connection.
Oh, good. So what's your inspiration, Tracee, to get involved in Never Is Now, this largest gathering around anti-Semitism and hate in the world? Why are you here?
I'm here because I love imagining a new world. I'm here because I like using the on-ramp of human connection to create spaces and a world where we don't have to have conversations about hate, where that doesn't exist and cannot live, it cannot flourish, it cannot have space because it doesn't match the environment. I'm here because of my understanding and connection to the principles around equity and justice and inclusion that really align with my own personal core values. And I'm committed to a world that's based in the love of humanity. And yeah, how about you? Why are you in this conversation with me for this wonderful conference?
Yeah, I mean, I'm here in part because of you, truly, and this is kind of an honor. But I think never is now is a very powerful, short way to tell a whole story. And it just hits me because we say never again, and yet we're going through things and we're behaving in ways that we said we wouldn't again. And so never is ever present. And I like the urgency of that title. You said something about, wanting to create essentially a world where we don't have to do conferences like this. I'm living in that world in the future, in our hypothetical higher plane with you. I too am committed to that. I'm here because I want to contribute, and time and attention are valuable, and I want to contribute those to something like this. I want to learn humbly. I have some experiences with certain forms of dehumanization and discrimination and hate, and I don't want that for anybody. Even the people I strongly disagree with, I don't want that. There's ways to do this and there's ways not. And so I think this
and there's ways to
organization, this
disagree.
gathering, exactly. So I'm here to learn too. I want to take part in the rest of the joint and listen to the specialists to up my skills and improve my practice of being a human, and as we say in our podcast, of citizening. This kind of verb version of it, not the show me your papers version. I want to understand, what identities are you bringing to this conversation? I see some from the outside, from the Wikipedias: Black, woman, Jewish, diva, goddess, leader. But what identities are you holding?
Well, I identify as a Black woman. I have not chosen Judaism as a religion. My father is Jewish and was raised Jewish. So according to Judaism, I am not Jewish, and it's not a religion I've chosen. I have practiced the high holidays once or twice. Growing up, my dad would have a Christmas tree in the in the living room and the menorah in the kitchen. But I identify as a human being with a big heart, whose feet are hopefully on the ground.
In comfortable size.
And I mean, my feet are smaller than people think usually. I mean, but yeah, they're planted on the ground. And so I bring all of that before I bring other people's identities into how I walk into the world. But I present as a Black woman to the world.
And what is that? What is that presentation meant for? It's a big question covering a lot of time.
It's a very big question.
But I think, what are the amazing parts of that identity that have helped power your life? And what are parts that have made life more interesting, if not more difficult, along the way?
Well, for me, my mixed heritage, mixed faith, and mixed family has been the biggest gift in the world. It, from a very young age, propelled me into life through the questions of how we're the same. That I enter conversations with my heart to your heart, my humanity to your humanity. From there, all the delicious stuff comes, right? Like all of the difference, the ways, the tradition, the culture, the race, the life that you've lived that you get to bring to the table. And for me, I have found so much texture and joy and robustness in that from everyone around me. So growing up, I was Tracy Joy Silverstein. The majority of my friends were Jewish. The majority of my friends were white. My whole family was Black. Then, except for my dad, that's not true. So my whole family wasn't Black. Well, but my dad wasn't. That was such a funny thing to say, but it's true. I didn't spend a lot of time with my dad's family. So it was my dad and then, my mom's extended family, my mom's siblings. We would go with them and all of our cousins. And so that world was inundated with Blackness, but I didn't identify it as Blackness. I identified it as my family.
Right.
And I think I became very aware of these things as I started to grow up, sort of the places of difference. And they became, in my opinion, the aces in my deck. It allowed me to walk into any space and feel I belonged. As I started to grow up, I would notice when I was the only, which was often. Still it happens. The only man, the only woman in a man's space, the only Black person in a space of mostly white people. I would notice those things as I got older. As I was young, when I was younger, I didn't notice those things. There were a couple of experiences of that growing up as a kid that were really interesting. I remember a homeless man on the street comment. I was walking with my friends down the street, and a homeless man actually said something about me being Black in this group of white friends. And it hadn't dawned on me in that way. That's such an interesting memory. I was trying to take myself back there actually and try and remember what if anything there was a feeling around that. But my mixed heritage gave me the gift of comfort anywhere. And I know that that's not everyone else's experience.
Yeah, that's
beautiful.
Also,
what people do know about me is, my mom is Diana Ross. I came into the world with that. And because of the privilege that I was raised with, light skin privilege, beauty privilege, fame privilege, money privilege, education, all of those things that also create a blind spot if you don't take the time and the work to open yourself to the spaces that could be blind. We all come with blind spots. But because of that, I leapt over a lot of the pointed end of what being a Black Jewish woman, the pointed end of that arrow, those experiences would have looked like. And for me personally, I ended up taking them as personal. So I didn't know that there was a systemic thing happening out in the world. I didn't know that racism and sexism were baked into so much of what my activities were, my life was, my choices were, and things like that. And as I've gotten older, I have really, and more educated, the reality of the system and those beliefs. You said something that was really interesting that I heard you say, something like systems are collective stories, a collection of stories, something like that from your TED Talk.
Yeah. I said systems are just collective stories we all believe in.
Yes.
Something
And
like
so
that.
For most of my growing up, I didn't know that they were stories. I just thought they were facts. And so the unpacking of so many of those things has been a big part of my adult life.
Yeah.
And then trying to dismantle
them. Sounds easy. So you should be done in a month?
Oh, no. I'm almost done now. Yeah.
Oh, okay, cool. Will you share the answer with the rest of us?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I wouldn't keep that to myself.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. That's good.
Yeah.
Some people might. Some people might. Let's talk about laughing.
Shall we?
You've been in comedy. I work in comedy. Like for me, the comedy piece, it happened accidentally. I grew up a very serious child, and I wasn't. No one in my grade school or middle school or even high school, if they say, I knew Baratunde was going to be funny, they're lying, and they're like the eyewitness that edits their testimony to fit the later discovered facts. There's just no way. I was a self-righteous, strident, holier than thou kid,
I'm
really
dead.
focused on politics and activism, and I fell into the humor
How did you
accidentally.
fall into the humor?
I tripped, and people laughed. No, I fell into it because it was two things. My mom, she created a house where we watched a lot of comedy and listened more than we watched. We listened to records of Red Fox and Richard Pryor and Whoopi Goldberg. We listened to cassettes of like Garrison Keillor, Lake Wobegon, and all these. I used to listen to these radio dramas from like the 40s that she grew up on.
I
And
don't know
Mom and
who those
Abner.
last two are.
You don't know who are?
The last two that you just said. I don't know who those are.
Oh, Garrison Keillor?
Mm-mm.
Yeah, he's totally not black at all. Like I guess the farthest from black you could get is a very, very white guy. Lake Wobegon's like a Midwestern. I don't know if it's Minnesota or Wisconsin, but somewhere in that region. And just a down home kind of folksy vibe, the opposite energy of a Red Fox. But all of that, I think, baked something around me that I didn't understand that I knew how to do until later in high school. A lot of my activism, I just got burnt out, and I got on the internet. I graduated high school in 1995. We had an early internet connection because I went to a very fancy high school in Washington, D.C. And so the early internet, I would start finding all these jokes online. And so I started sharing the jokes that I found. And I became like this joke DJ where I had this email list, and I would send out jokes every week to my growing email list. And that evolved so that by the time I got to college, I was writing a satirical newsletter for a small circle of friends, and then hundreds and then thousands of people who wanted my kind of onion-like take on the world before I knew what the onion was. So the humor helped me calm down from a lot of the anger over the state of the world. So it wasn't even about a high-minded mission. It just made me feel better. Then I discovered through writing, oh, people are able to see what I'm saying differently if I make it funny. And then once I got on stage with comedy, I could feel the energy. And there were folks who I might have said the same thing to, and they just shut down. But when I do it with a comedic story and relate to them and make myself vulnerable in the story, then they see themselves in me. And now we got a bridge, and we can walk back and forth across that bridge and build a deeper connection. But it wasn't on purpose, right? It was this accidental discovery. And I'm curious for you, what has it done for you, and how did you find your way to it?
Well, my born middle name is Tracee Joy, and I came out this way.
I woke
Joy
up
is
like
my
this,
natural, joy is my natural disposition.
Yeah.
Obviously there's a flip side to that. I have a lot of darker sides, but that's part of
Tracee
the
Rage,
shadow
huh?
quality. Well, yes, I did a TED Talk on Fury. I
That's
mean,
right. You did.
I have, those are the things that fuel and feed each other and that make me a whole human, and wholeness is what I strive for. So
Yeah.
I came out joyful. I am joyful. It is my natural disposition. I don't consider myself a comic or a comedian. I love to laugh. I love other people laughing. I think it opens your heart. And I think when your heart's open, there's so much that you can receive. It's like, a spoonful of sugar helps the medicine go down. It opens you. It is one of to me, the highest forms of spirituality. It is just up there with the good stuff. And it has translated into my work. My joy contains a lot of vulnerability. It saved my life in so many moments. I am the funniest when I am the most hurt. It's where some of my best stuff comes from in therapy. I'm hilarious.
I'm hilarious in therapy that's a great descriptor.
I am hilarious in therapy.
Is that like I'm a great singer in the shower? I'm hilarious in therapy.
Yeah. I've never done stand-up, but it is the great connector. It is also my saving grace, being able, and I get it from my father. My father has a wonderful self-deprecating sense of humor and has an ability to laugh at himself in a way that is very healing. And it has helped me. I mean, I can make fun of myself. Timing is everything. But it is one of the best showers you can take. And I agree with you that a lot of people most human beings can receive so much more when they are laughing than when they're being punched in the face.
In terms of national awareness of longstanding pains and these public flashpoints of dehumanization and hate. And a lot of people got snapped awake by Jews Will Not Replace Us in Charlottesville. A lot of people got snapped awake by the slow murder by Derek Chauvin of George Floyd out in public in broad daylight on camera in front of his colleagues and coworkers. And a lot of people got snapped awake on January 6th of 2021 with this mob, this violent mob that attacked our house, in the U.S., our people's house.
And tried to overthrow our government.
Yes, trying to overthrow our government, trying to take away all of our power, because it's all ours in a democracy. We the people in people power. So I always thought it was like self-defeating and sad to rant against the government in a democracy and to dog the government. It's like, you're just hating on yourself, bro. Like, it's you. Do something, but don't burn it all. Anyway, that's another conversation to some degree. But I am curious, because joy is your middle name, what are you feeling joyful about in the context of all that there is to feel pain about right now?
Well, I like the way you framed that, that these moments have been flashpoints. Before I get to what I'm feeling joyful about, I will say that as a society, and as a people, we have seen with our eyes, the one word you didn't use was violence. There's been so much violence of language, violence of action, violence against people's bodies. And we have seen it, and it's very painful. Obviously, the pain of seeing and witnessing those acts of violence, doesn't hold a candle to those that it is perpetrated on. But I like that you framed it as those have been flashpoints, and it woke a lot of people up. I think that there's a lot of healing and holding to be done of ourselves and of each other around that. I think between what we've been through in the last 2 years of this pandemic and all of those different things that you cited and so many more, we need to allow ourselves room to process those things. And I don't think we'll know what the impact has been for a long time. The things that have given me joy was out of my reach for a little bit, and it was very scary.
Talk to me about that.
Well, I felt like so many things, so many assumptions of the foundation of our lives was out of whack. It felt like there was no floor beneath me. And that was a good thing, because the floor is broken. It is broken. And I kept likening it back to, I was, topple the patriarchy, all of these, take down the system, dismantle the system, all of these different things. And so many of us have been surviving and even thriving within the system, even though that system has been built on the backs of so many and those that are vulnerable, and is continuing to do that in that way, which the pandemic laid bare, that all of the frontline workers, women and people of color, like, hello, we're still doing this, that sick leave is not paid for, like all of these different things. It was just laid bare. It's been here forever, but somehow a lot of people saw it as a flashpoint and woke up. And so even though, I might be on the 13th floor of the building of patriarchy and white supremacy and like all these things, like I haven't been able to open my windows, you know what I mean? And all of a sudden we're toppling it, and like there's no staircase up to get the stuff. It's like there's all these metaphors that we can use for what's happening, but it needs to happen. We need to tumble these things. These systems do not support a thriving society. They do not support liberated humans. They do not call on agency for an individual and a human. They don't call on familial connection that allows us to thrive as a community and all of those kinds of things. And so joy was out of my reach in these moments because it felt so destabilizing to be properly confronted by all of the masks that all of us are upholding in order to make these things feel like they're okay, so that our souls can live, So what brought me out of that and back to a space of joy? Being of service, being in community, being in connection, genuine connection with others, sharing that vulnerability, that fear, that confusion, that upset, that rage, that fury, being able to express that in healthy and safe ways with people that I could feel safe with and feel seen by. That is how we continue to grow and heal as a society and as a culture, not by hurting each other. And it's hard because these are things, these arrows that we're at the pointed end of, they hurt. They take people's livelihood. They take people's lives. They take people's roofs from over their heads and the food from off their tables and the love that you get to express with each other. So being of service, being in community, being and leaning towards those that have more information and more language than I do to help me hold these spaces that feel untenable are the things that give me joy. Also trees, also my nieces and nephews, also potato chips, also olives. Let me think. Baths, meditation, pools, water. I love water, like being in it. What else brings me joy? Watching really good TV, hanging with friends, and really good dinners. That's a good list.
It's a great list, Tracee, and sounds like a great weekend party at Tracee's house, y'all. Tracee Ellis Ross, it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Baratunde, thank you so much. And thank you, ADL, for this. This was a lovely conversation.
Yeah, and let's not have to do this forever.
No, let's be in person.
Actually means never. Yeah.
Oh my God. Yeah.
How profound and hilarious those two are. I'm so glad that we're still hanging out and staying tuned for much more content ahead. We'll have a special address from David Wolpe in the announcement of our ADL In Concert Against Hate honorees. This year ADL is presenting the inaugural Changemaker Award, created to celebrate extraordinary individuals from the sports or entertainment industry, outstanding record of using their platform to promote positive change in the world by speaking out against hate and supporting marginalized communities. Coming on the heels of an unprecedented 5th Olympic gold medal and 4th WNBA championship in 2020, all while launching Together, a new media platform focusing on the rich storytelling rooted in lifestyle and youth culture. I can't think of a more deserving recipient than Sue Bird, a true all-star both on and off the court. Please welcome ADL Pacific Northwest Regional Director Miri Cyphers to the screen to introduce the inaugural recipient of the ADL Changemaker Award.
Good evening. I'm Miri Cyphers, the Regional Director of ADL's Pacific Northwest office, and tonight I have the distinct honor to introduce ADL's inaugural recipient of the Changemaker Award to an iconic athlete and game-changing activist, Sue Bird. As a little girl who played basketball, I revered WNBA athletes like Sue Bird, who exemplify women who break barriers and own their own strength. ADL established the Changemaker Award to recognize individuals from the sports or entertainment industry with an outstanding record of using their platform to promote positive change in the world by speaking out against hate and supporting marginalized communities. I cannot think of a more deserving person to be the first ever recipient of this award than Sue Bird. Born in Nassau County, New York, and a dual American-Israeli citizen, Sue Bird has become synonymous with the community of our Pacific Northwest through her 18-year professional playing career with the Seattle Storm, winning an extraordinary 4 WNBA championships, being the only professional female basketball player to win championships in 3 consecutive decades. On a national level, she has brought home an unprecedented 5 Olympic gold medals for Team USA, in addition to another 4 World Cup golds and 1 bronze, giving her 10 total international medals for basketball, more than any other men's or women's player in the world. Simply put, she is one of the greatest athletes of all time. What is arguably more impressive than her sports career is her work advocating for marginalized communities. Alongside female sports superstars Alex Morgan, Simone Manuel, and Chloe Kim, Sue Bird founded Together in 2021, a new media and commerce company with a focus on rich storytelling rooted in lifestyle and youth culture. Together is where culture, activism, lifestyle, and sports converge. Their mission is to shatter the often narrow depictions of women in the media with content featuring a rich and diverse, inclusive community of game changers, culture shapers, thought leaders, and barrier breakers. Through Sue's efforts and influence, Together has become an international brand with courageous, innovative, and fresh stories from women of all walks of life around the world. Not only does Sue do work to advocate for diverse female identifying voices, but she's a role model for young people in the LGBTQ plus community after publicly coming out in 2018 with then girlfriend, now fiance, and USA soccer legend, Megan Rapinoe. They went on to become the first ever same-sex couple to be featured on the cover of ESPN's Body Issue, with Sue saying, "The way I see it is more how you want to change the conversation or change the narrative of things." In addition, Sue, along with her fellow Seattle Storm teammates, was an incredibly vocal leader in the racial justice movement in 2020, using her platform in the WNBA as a building block to extend the conversation of racial justice and police brutality in America. She also came up with the idea for WNBA players to wear black t-shirts with "Vote Warnock" on the back in protest of the racist rhetoric used by former Atlanta Dream co-owner Kelly Loeffler. The shirts brought in national media coverage and sparked continued conversation around voting rights in America. Talk about a changemaker. On behalf of ADL, I want to not only congratulate you for your achievements on the court, but more so thank you for your continued commitment to living marginalized voices while creating safe, inclusive, and unapologetic platforms where representation and equality are the norm. Your history of using your platform as an advocate for underrepresented communities is so inspiring, and I applaud you for your incredible work to be a change maker here in our own Seattle community and in communities around the world. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinct privilege to introduce ADL's inaugural Changemaker Award recipient, Sue Bird.
Hi, and thank you so much for that kind introduction. I'm honored to accept the inaugural Changemaker Award from ADL. ADL's mission to stop the defamation of the Jewish people and to secure justice and fair treatment to all is personal to me. And I'm honored to be a part of Never Is Now, because now is the time to come together and speak out after a year of unimaginable hate. But most of all, I'm honored to receive an award, not for scoring the most points or dropping the most dimes, but for recognizing and praising the fact that I did not just stick to sports. On a daily basis, we've got politicians, some members of the media and fans telling athletes like myself to keep activism out of sport. And I get it. Sometimes you just want to watch a game, but people who tell me to stick to sports don't understand that becoming an activist wasn't an option. As a female athlete, it's sadly never just been about basketball. Sometimes it feels like I'm judged based on everything but the game that I play. I'm judged because I'm a woman. I'm judged because I'm Jewish. I'm judged because I'm gay. And many of my teammates, they're judged because they're Black. Sure, sports is a mirror of society. You can't stick to sports and ignore the world in which you're playing and living. More than that, over time, I realized that I have to stand up for myself and stand up for the things that I believe in. And this became increasingly clear to me over the past year. In 2020, Atlanta's WNBA team was co-owned by a then U.S. senator who criticized our league and its players for being political and for supporting Black Lives Matter. This went against everything we all believed in, and we had to do something. So myself and 143 other WNBA players, our whole league, came together in support of the Reverend Raphael Warnock, and we wore Vote Warnock t-shirts. Maybe you've seen them. Even if you haven't, a lot of people in Georgia did. And less than 1 week before we started our campaign, Warnock was in 4th place out of 21 candidates running for one of Georgia's U.S. Senate seats. Today, Warnock is the first Black senator in Georgia history. I always tell my teammates that the proof's in the pudding, and I think our experience with the Georgia Senate race really proved that we are stronger when we band together. Even if you don't have a platform like mine, there's strength in numbers, and we must continue fighting for what we believe in together and call out inequities and injustices so that we can create lasting change. Strength in numbers is also at the core of my latest venture. Myself and 3 other amazing female athletes, Alex Morgan, Simone Manuel, and Chloe Kim, started our new media and commerce company called Together. We all noticed that women in sports don't get the media coverage that men do. And I think some people say, so what? But this is so important. This lack of media coverage matters. Young girls need to see themselves reflected in the heroes they watch on TV or read about online. And it's time to shift how we understand the value of women. Men are judged a lot of times on potential, while women are judged on accomplishment. This system is biased, and we're working as a team to balance those scales. Now, you may hear a story like mine and think, oh, Sue Bird can do so much because she's famous. What can I do? And if you take only one thing away from my story, let it be this. You don't have to be a star athlete to be a change maker. All you need to do is speak out for what you believe in. Never let the threat of being political stop you from standing up for yourself and for others. I am proud to be who I am. I'm proud to be Jewish. I'm proud to be gay. I'm proud to be a woman. Our identities are beautiful and need to be protected. Embrace your identity and fight to make sure that it can't be taken away from you or anyone else. And don't ever let someone tell you that you don't have a voice just because of who you are or what you do for a living. Thank you so much.
I don't know about you, but I'm standing up a little bit stiffer and feeling a little bit prouder thanks to Sue Bird. What a change maker, an embodiment of good-natured role models around the world. Thank you, Sue. As Vice President Harris noted on Sunday evening, today marks the 83rd anniversary of Kristallnacht, the Night of Broken Glass, which was the horrific Nazi pogrom in Germany. It signaled the start of events that led to the genocide of 6 million Jews across Europe. Over 2 nights, violent mobs freely attacked Jews on the streets and in their homes, places of work, and houses of worship. Close to 100 Jews were murdered, and many more were seriously injured. More than 7,000 Jewish businesses and hundreds of synagogues were destroyed. Jewish cemeteries were desecrated, and Jewish schools were vandalized. And sadly, 30,000 Jews were arrested and sent to concentration camps. On this day, and really on all days, it's important for us to reflect upon the lessons learned 83 years ago as they pertain to the virulent rise of anti-Semitism today. To address this resurgence of anti-Semitism and to celebrate the continued tenacity of the Jewish people, please welcome the senior rabbi of Sinai Temple and one of the most influential rabbis in the country, David Wolpe.
When God tells Abraham that the other nations of the world will be blessed through the Jewish people, we might almost see that as ironic. Because even though it has been true, how often have the other nations of the world seen the opposite? That somehow the presence of the Jews is bad in their midst, has to be extirpated or somehow diminished. And yet we know how much we have blessed the world. And so we face Jew hatred, anti-Semitism, as a puzzle, a conundrum, something that is hard to understand. Perhaps the best single definition was given by Maurice Samuel when he said, "No one loves his alarm clock." And we do, again and again, revive the conscience of the world. And so we have to figure out what it is in our day, because in our day, as in every generation, never again is now. What do we do in our day to face the resurgence of hostility and anger and hatred that is directed against our people and our land? And I think we need to make distinctions. The Talmud is all about distinctions. First of all, we have to draw those who are our allies and well-wishers close. Sometimes we have such a relentlessly negative view that we don't realize how many people wish to stand with us, care for us, and love us. And we have to cherish them and embrace them. And then, second, we have to be careful not to respond to every statement of ignorance as hatred. As we need to embrace those who love us, we need to educate those who are hostile out of ignorance and elevate their knowledge of Judaism and the Jewish people and who we are and what we do and what we represent and where we have been. And third, we need to relentlessly oppose and speak out against those who hate us. In other words, it requires love, flexibility, and courage. And we can't afford to give up on any of those. This is a continuing fight, but it is also in some ways integrated into our mission. Because as we explain who we are, we come better to understand who we are. As we come closer to allies, we understand better what it means to be good in this world and to be kind. As we fight those who hate, we recognize that hatred of the Jews rarely travels alone. That we're fighting hatred on a broad front against many. You know, many years ago, 30, 40 years ago, some archaeologists were doing an excavation outside the walls of Jerusalem in the valley of Hinnom, Gehenna, which is the Jewish word for hell. And there they found 2 rolled up silver amulets, the oldest bits of Torah that exist in the world. You can see them if you go to the Israel Museum. And what did they find excavating in Gehenna, in hell, from the Torah? Yevarechecha Hashem v'yishmerecha. Yair Hashem panav elecha v'yichuneka. Yisa Hashem panav elecha v'yasim lecha shalom. May God bless you and keep you. May God's countenance shine upon you and be gracious to you. May God be with you and give you peace. The oldest bit of Torah we have is a blessing of peace that is snatched from hell. It's a combination of embrace, understanding, and courage. We can have that too. We should. We will. Never again.
Thank you to Rabbi Wolpe. He was incredibly inspiring and a perfect summation of never again. And of course, never is now, 2021, sums up so much of that sentiment. We came together in the last 48 hours as one unyielding and unified voice to shout that enough is enough in many ways. Never is now. I hope you were able to learn about and discuss the contemporary drivers of anti-Semitism and hate and how you too can add your voice to the conversation. The fight isn't over, so please continue to the conversations and the takeaways and think about ways in which you can take action in the ways that you learned in the sessions this week. Again, if you'd like to learn more or watch a session that you were unable to attend, please visit neverisnow.org or the event hub where you can watch or rewatch all of this year's exciting panels with distinguished subject matter experts. And as you've heard, there is still so much work left to be done in the fight against discrimination, anti-Semitism, and hate. You can go to adl.org to learn more about how ADL is providing anti-bias and anti-Semitism education to millions of students, monitoring and disrupting and exposing dangerous extremists, helping to create safe and equitable online spaces for all, and advocating at all levels of government for secure justice and fair treatment for all. There are so many ways you can join ADL on the front lines. So I encourage you to visit the ADL website and to sign up for newsletters and follow them on social media. And don't forget that December 12th, ADL will be hosting their annual ADL In Concert Against Hate virtually, so you can watch from your home or anywhere in the world. The night will consist of music, community, and celebration packed with spectacular, cannot-miss performances from acclaimed stars while celebrating real-life heroes and their extraordinary acts of courage and compassion in the face of bigotry and hate. We'll conclude tonight's program with a sneak peek of the amazing 2021 concert honorees, so I thank you now for attending Never Is Now. Have a great night and never stop fighting hate. I'm Juju Chang. Good night.